That's not going to be good. Unless you like singing the Briscoe Darling. Going on the jug. Do what?
Just jump in.
Yeah. There's so many things on that show I relate to. Blowing the jug, and every time they would put one of those big guys in a suit.
Oh, yeah.
That's me in a suit, if you want to know what I look like in a suit. That's Ray Hollister in a suit, that's me. Well, we're going to continue today with our study of the life of Moses. And kind of an unconventional study, I know, but that's okay. Because I like pulling things out of the story that often get overlooked. And like I said the very first day, I cannot read Exodus without seeing Charlton Heston up there holding up the rod or something. And I don't know that Moses looked like Charlton Heston, but he'll always look like Charlton Heston. I've seen that movie so many times. But today we're going to look in chapter 7, verse 8. If you remember leading up to this, Moses had his first encounter with Pharaoh, and it didn't go well. Pharaoh said, when Moses said, "Let my people go," Pharaoh said no. He wasn't expecting that. He was expecting Pharaoh to say, "Oh, okay, sounds good to me." Because he thought this was going to be a quick and easy departure. But it wasn't. And in fact, not only did Pharaoh turn his wrath towards the Israelites by taking away their hay, but not reducing the quota for making bricks, his own people turned against him. And they called down curses from God on him and things like that. So as you might guess, he was just a little bit discouraged by the whole thing. And in fact, we see Moses revert back to the Moses who was in the Midian wilderness tending sheep when God first spoke to him, because God did all this miraculous stuff, burning bush, turned his staff into a snake, and told him to pick it up by the tail. Now, I don't know about you, but if God wants to speak to me using a snake, probably ain't the best way. Maybe a kitty cat or a puppy, but yesterday we were cleaning up some trash along the edge of our yard, and I picked up an old box, and there was a snake. I took off too, though. Denise said, "What was it?" I said, "It's a snake. Is it poisonous?" It was to me. And I don't like snakes at all. But Moses obeyed, and he picked up the snake by the tail, which isn't what you want to do. You'd rather if you got to pick one up, pick it up by the business end, as my dad used to say, not by the tail. And it turned back into a staff. And you would think, well, my goodness, that should be enough. But you got to remember, Moses has spent 40 years in the wilderness being flat. All the pride was gone. All the arrogant self-confidence gone. Now, in his mind, in his perception of things, he was just a lowly shepherd. And God tells him to go speak to Pharaoh, and he says, "I can't. Pharaoh's not going to listen to me. I can't even talk like him. I don't have an authoritative voice. Nobody's going to listen to me." Now, that's not the Moses who left Egypt. The Moses who left Egypt was a man in charge. A man who thought he could help God out by killing one of the Egyptians. That wasn't this Moses. So he goes through this thing after getting back into discouragement. God said, "Now listen, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to send you back to Pharaoh. He's not going to obey. He's not going to listen to you. But I want you to do it anyway. I want you to be faithful to present it to him. But you need to understand the big picture. The big picture is, I'm destroying his country by his own pride. So you go back and you speak to him, even though he's not going to listen. had a wonderful calling for an evangelist. I'm calling you to be an evangelist. I'm sending you to the nations. Oh, by the way, nobody's ever going to respond. And what a contrast. We said last week with Jonah, who was the world's worst evangelist and had a whole citywide response to his invitation. It didn't get worse than Jonah when it came to evangelism. I mean, I thought I used to be bad, but he was worse because he could just tell people you're going to hell and I don't care. So maybe that works today. I don't know. I don't think so. But that's what he tells Moses. He's not going to listen. I'm going to harden his heart until I destroy his country. Then he'll listen. You see, God was going to release his people regardless. They were leaving. Only question is how much damage was it going to require for that to happen? And the damage was going to be the destruction of Pharaoh's empire. And ultimately, Pharaoh himself. So, let's look at this. And again, Moses pulled out the thing of, well, I can't speak. You need to see somebody else who can speak for me. And so God said, okay, you can have Aaron. And Aaron, he tells in verse 8, he says, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. Now that's when I exit. Okay, but they did. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh, and he did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers and the Egyptian magicians who also did the same thing by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. Now, when you read that, my question would be, as I said in the beginning, why a snake? What was important? Why use a snake here? Of all things to use a snake. I'd already left the room by then, but why the snake? Well, interesting wordplay here. When you look at the passage a couple of chapters earlier, when Moses threw his rod down and it became a snake, the Hebrew word for snake is the traditional snake. It's what we would have used for that snake I saw yesterday. When Aaron does it here, the Hebrew word is different. The Hebrew word here is sea creature. Now, it can include a snake, that's a water snake and land snake, but it most often was used of a crocodile. Now, did his staff become a crocodile? No. It became a snake. But here's the wordplay. That snake and the crocodile represented Pharaoh's authority and the grandeur of Egypt. See, the crocodile, like we have the eagle, the crocodile was their national symbol. The snake, what did Pharaoh always have on his head? A crown had a serpent on the front of it, right? That represented his authority. Both were tied to Egyptian mythology. But we're just tying it back to the fact that Pharaoh was very proud of his accomplishments and his confidence in the majesty and prestigious history of Egypt. So Pharaoh considered himself to be invincible. Well, what is pride? You see, Pharaoh's pride is the thing that's really going to bring him down. Pride, if you took it to its simplest definition, would just be self-exaltation. Now, the Hebrew word for pride that's used here is Yah. God. G-A-A-H. And it means to lift up or exalt. It's the same word that's used when someone says, exalt the Lord, as in the Psalms. So what's happening when somebody has a problem with pride? They're taking God's place and exalting themselves. Okay? So here you have Moses Here you have Pharaoh, and both of them came from the same background. Both of them have the same training in Pharaoh's house, the same fine education. They both understand, as best it was understood then, mathematics, science, medicine, engineering, leadership, navigation, how to lead, how to be victorious in battle. They both had the same background, but now you have two totally different people who are at two totally different places in life. You have Pharaoh and Moses. What was the difference? The difference was this. Yes, God had his hand on Moses. That's true. But because God had his hand on Moses, Moses had something Pharaoh did not have. A median experience. You see, Pharaoh represented pride. And what pride does to a person. In fact, if we think through the scriptures, some of the places that deal with pride, Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goes before a fall or destruction. And NIV, a haughty spirit before a fall. So we could say in that case, pride is a magnet for humiliation. In 1 Peter 5:5, it says, God resists the proud.
Yes.
It gives grace to them.
Yes.
Now, what does the word resist mean? Resist means God places himself in battle array against us. That just kind of so deep. Not against Satan, against us. So pride, we could say, causes God to oppose us. You know, one reason why people say, none of my prayers ever get answered, is because there are prideful people, and God has had to set himself against them. And you know, when God sets himself against us, life doesn't go well. And in fact, he's always got a Midian experience waiting for us. And the third thing Pharaoh's life illustrates about pride is that pride often sets up our bondage and self-destruction. And that's going to ultimately lead to his self-destruction. So in contrast to that, we have Moses. Numbers 12:3 says of Moses, now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. So we've got two men who were raised the same, similar background, but in two totally different places in life. One is self-exalted. And when you think of Pharaoh, it's easy to understand why. He was a man who had basically unbroken success. He had people surround him who told him how wonderful he was all the time. He even had people who worshiped him as if he were a god, because they believed that Pharaoh was the son of Ra, the supreme god of the Egyptian pantheon. So here's a guy who's had all the success you could ever want, but he never had a median. And then here's Moses over here who once had that but lost it all and went through his Midian experience, and he comes out of it flat. So what can we take away from that? If God's going to use us very much And the first week we talked about one-hit wonders. I don't think anybody here wants to be a one-hit wonder with God. Meaning God uses you once, but that's all you do. And then you just got to get cast to the side because you're not usable. I think God wants to use all of us in significant ways with longevity. But see, the only way we can do that is to be a people who are usable. Now, how does he make us usable? One is the knowledge. He gives us the knowledge. So sometimes that means we have to maybe go to school or we definitely have to become serious students of the Word. We have to get engaged in ministry or whatever else it is that God gives us the opportunity to do. But the other part of that is character formation. And so we can have all the knowledge, all the skills, all the natural ability in the world, but if we don't have the character to go with it, guess what? You're going to be a one-hit wonder. Having the, everything going your way in that part, but letting character slide is going to set you up for your own downfall. We just saw that with one of our champions. We're not talking about folks in, some kind of something we don't really agree with to start with, but one of our champions just went down because he had it all over here on the ability side, but not on the character side. And so now what's happening to him? His whole ministry is being dismantled. In fact, this week they said they were changing their name. I don't know what, but they're changing their name. They're going to drop his name off of the ministry. Which was the ministry he started. Why? Not because of ability, but because of his character. Okay? So, when God's going to use somebody very much, he always puts them in opportunities to be trained, to get the equipment they need, but he also puts them in situations where their character is going to be formed. And so here's Moses, who's got the abilities, 40 years as part of Pharaoh's family. So he had all the training and opportunities that any of Pharaoh's children would have had. So he had this covered. What he didn't have covered was this. Character. Because not only was he trained to be part of, or did he have opportunities as part of Pharaoh's family, he also had the arrogance of Pharaoh's family. Before God could use him, that had to go. 40 years at Pharaoh's house, 40 years living in tents and watching sheep every day. Over those 40 years, all that attitude that he gained by being part of Pharaoh's family, and all that unbroken success, and all those accolades of people around him. Oh, Moses, you're so great. You're so wonderful. Oh, you're something else. You're really good. You're really something. You got potential. All that had to be pressed out before God could use him to do a big work. So what is a Midian experience? Well, it's a time of extreme trial and humiliation. Now, doesn't that sound wonderful? Doesn't that make you want to sign up today? Lord, I'm ready for that Midian experience. Well, you don't have to volunteer. He's going to give you one. That's about as pointless as praying God will give you faith. He will. It's usually painful, but he will. It's a time of extreme trial and humiliation where all of our natural arrogance is pressed out of us. And we go through many Midian experiences in life. But it always follows, usually close behind, some season in our life where we get to thinking a little more highly of ourselves than we person of the year. Ooh, that must really be something. Let's see what you are. The bottom falls out. When the bottom falls out, you land in medium. And you go from thinking you're really something to hurting sheep. It's a time when we learn to trust and see God in new ways. I mean, when you get in that season and life as you knew it, it's over. It could be due to the loss of a loved one, which is the most significant probably of all the losses, the loss of a loved one. And knowing life's never going to go back to what it was. It could be the loss of a job, loss of a career, loss of a home, loss anything, loss of health. Anything can be a median for a person. But when we're going through it, one thing we soon discover is we have to trust God to get us through it. And like Job was, when he was trying to figure out why God would allow him, a righteous man, to experience the extreme suffering he experienced, when it was all said and done, at the end of the book, he said, I used to hear about you, but now I see. And see, that's what medium does. It takes us away from kind of this abstract understanding of God to where God becomes personal. And, you know, part of that becoming personal also is correcting some of our wrong theology. Because we go into these times sometimes confident, well, we've got God figured out. And he's kind of like a vending machine. If I do this, he'll do that. We're going to have a transaction. So God, I tell you what, I'm going to be really good this week. I'm going to be really faithful this week. So I'm expecting some good things to come my way next week. And then you wreck your car or lose your job. And you say, wait a minute, this isn't what I signed up for. I'm supposed to be good. You know, we like to lecture God sometimes. God, I'm the good one. And good people are supposed to get good things. In fact, I had someone tell me one time that was going through a very dark medium in her life. And she said, this is not the God I signed up for. So median is going to be a time when her theology gets some adjustment. Median is a time when at some point God recommissions us for service. And we face our lack of ability because in that state we lose sight of the fact that God has equipped us to perform what He's called us to do. In other words, when we're in median, and boy, we've been there 40 years, it seems like, and we're as flat as a flat tire. And as if you ask us, we tell you our best days are behind us. We remember when. Well, what about now? Now I'm nothing. Now it's over. Now it's done. I'm just waiting to die. And then God says, no. Now you're usable. Here's your opportunity. And He starts giving us these little opportunities. You do know Billy Graham didn't start out preaching to Coliseums. He started out preaching to squirrels and raccoons and whatever else was in the woods when he went down there to start preaching. Now, you look at his life and you say, well, my goodness, that guy, he never had a median. Oh, yes, he did. You see, before he went into ministry, he was going into business. He already had his life planned out. He had a job waiting, very promising career. He was studying business in college. He had a fiancée who had signed on for that promising career that he was anticipating. And Right in the middle of that, he gets saved, and God calls him to preach. So he goes to his fiancée and says, "Hey, guess what? I got saved." Well, she was kind of lukewarm towards that, but okay. And then he said, "Hey, guess what? I'm changing majors." What? I'm changing majors? God's called me to preach. I'm going to Bible college. Not with me. She told him, "You'll make a choice. It's going to be ministry or me. And I'm not signing on to be a ministry for you." And that night, he left. He went out to the local golf course. And he laid on the golf course and cried out to God all night. Because she put him in meeting. Lay there all night long crying out to God. "God, I love her, but I know what you called me to do. Why are you making me have to choose?" God didn't give him any relief. God didn't speak and say, "Well, I'll tell you what, I changed my mind. You can just be a lay speaker. How about that, Bill?" God didn't let up. You know what? He never does. When God has called us to do something and He's positioning us to do it, even though we may be flat,